Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Kannan Kothandaraman, co-founder and CEO at Selector AI. Today's show is all about artificial intelligence, which has been in the news heavily lately. But of course, this is a capacious term, and on Telegeography Explains the Internet, we're going to be narrowly focused on how AI ML will impact telecom networks. We've talked a lot on this show about the meaningful changes that have come to corporate networks over the past several years, though often about how that impacts your underlay selection or cloud utilization, or especially security, other factors like that. My interview with Kannan, of course, is all about AI, specifically AIOPs, which, don't worry, we will define on the show, but it is a key tool to meet the challenges that come with this reimagined WAN. So Selector is using AI for monitoring and problem solving, and we get into Kannan's views on the difference between an observability tool and an observability platform. And I always like to get my guests to talk about specific use cases, particularly when it's like this for a new service or technology. So we get into some real life examples of how their tool can be deployed and used. Finally, of course, I always like to get guests to opine on the future of telecoms and networks. So Khan and I discuss how AI for networking is developing, what changes we can expect to see in the coming years, and really where we are along in that journey. So this was a really illuminating conversation, especially on this timely topic of AI and how it could be employed in the telecom world. I think you'll enjoy it. Welcome to the show, Kannan.
Thank you, Greg. Well,
could we start out with a brief background on you and how you came to found Selector?
hi, my name is Kannan Kothandaraman. I'm co-founder and CEO of Selector AI. We provide observability and AIOps solutions for our customers that run mission-critical networks and application infrastructure. The team here at Selector has previously built products at companies such as Juniper, VMware, Nutanix, and Cisco. And these products run some of the largest networks and applications infrastructure in the world. And that's the background that led us to founding Selector 4 years ago.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Kannan, you came from your most recent background was at Juniper?
That's correct. Yes, I was responsible for the routing product line at Juniper.
Gotcha. And so that's going to bring us, I think, into kind of where we want to talk about today. That the big topic here is AI ML in monitoring of the network. But I want to start with why that's necessary. So something that we certainly have talked a lot on the show about is the big changes that have happened in the WAN over the last several years, really things starting with SD-WAN and freeing up the underlay. And then, of course, the move to cloud services away from on-prem compute and all that sort of thing. And then, of course, COVID accelerated all of these changes, and the WAN looks really fundamentally different here in 2023 than it did 5 or especially 10 years ago. We've talked about all the implications for cloud services and underlay selection and SD-WAN service and security and SASE and all that. But how did these changes impact how folks should look at a monitoring solution?
Absolutely. You stated it very well. There have been massive architectural changes that are underpinned by business transformation that has been happening for networking. Right. Even before the move to cloud, the changes were afoot in what is the role of a network. Right. First, applications are no longer delivered in a monolithic data center. I would be stating the obvious when mentioning cloud, but increasingly it's not just cloud but edge. It's becoming far more important in being able to provide flexible delivery of applications, be it in a data center, in a cloud, or at the edge. And what exactly is the edge? Right? That itself is amorphous. And as you rightfully mentioned, the pandemic has made all of our homes edge networks as well.
Hmm.
And it's no longer, okay, I'm going to log in and check email. No, I'm doing this podcast from my home, and the network, and more importantly, the performance of the network is absolutely crucial. And most enterprises are taking a hybrid approach. It's no longer just a data center that they own, or a cloud or edge. They have SaaS that they are consuming across multiple cloud providers. Usually infrastructure as a service, they pick one cloud provider and stay with that. And then they still have their own data centers. They're
Right.
not completely abandoning them. Large enterprises still need to hedge. Is everything in cloud, or is some of that in
Hmm.
cloud? But clearly, SaaS has moved to the cloud, and even their own applications are no longer monolithic.
Right.
Containers and disaggregation are key driving trends here. So, what does this mean for networking? What does this mean for monitoring? It used to be where networking was, did I get you from A to B, connectivity, and I'm good? That's no longer the case. Right? SLA
Hmm.
driven application delivery is what networking teams are being asked to support, and performance is key. And it's heterogeneous, as we just talked about before. And there are lots of vendors, lots of technologies, a lot of protocols involved in this solving this puzzle. And all of this is making networking more complex, not less. Yeah, we work with
Absolutely.
a
Yeah.
lot of different enterprises, a lot of different customers, and they are drowning in complexity. They are
Hmm.
drowning in operations that haven't fully evolved. And every networking leader that I talk to wants to move away, and is in the process of moving away from CLI manual operations to automated DevOps based workflows. That's the only way to tame complexity. And at the center of all of this is real time observability and multi domain AIOPs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You can't automate what you can't see. Right?
Hmm.
And the cloud, and especially the hyperscale cloud providers, they started on this early. They have very sophisticated analytics and automation underpinned by that has enabled them to tame their complexity and the scale. Now the rest of the world needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, I remember years ago at our event, the WAN Summit, hearing um, enterprise WAN managers asking the carriers and the vendors on stage, "Hey, when can I get application specific SLAs?" And they, in a way, got what they wanted, but with the cost of it being much more complex. When you have when it's all about how the network is performing, and your SLAs are attached to that, then there's only one thing to think about, I guess. Whereas now, since as you say, and just to back that up, our
Mhm.
research definitely shows that everyone has a mix of still some on-premise data centers, and they're using multiple hyperscalers always, and then you add on SaaS, not to mention the shadow IT stuff that may be outside of even what the network team is aware of, and so this has all become more functional for them. The enterprises really wanted to be able to look at the SLA per the application, but it is much harder to manage, right? So, and I can see, I think we'll start to get into this, that very much that humans can't stay on top of this. Especially, we now live in a world where the skills in networking are not sort of very well distributed in some cases, and it's hard to find folks with these very focused areas of expertise. So what role do you think automation plays in trying to understand this new network?
Yeah, that's a good question. If we look at both automation and monitoring, the prior generation of tools, and we had monitoring was the focus, right? Monitoring was difficult. Being
Hmm.
able to get reliable data, auto discovery of your infrastructure, and then being able to understand what is happening at a very basic level was very complex. You had tools like SolarWinds or PRTG for on-prem, or as the move to cloud, the rise of Datadog. These tools will tell you is what is happening literally in your infrastructure. With monitoring, You tell a tool what data you want and to notify if a particular value is changed. Right? It's easier said than done, but that's basically the basics of what these tools did. It's what you see is what you get.
Hmm.
It's noisy and it's manual, but it's very rich and complex in what it can provide. But invariably, teams have to operations teams or engineering teams, what we call swivel chair. You have multiple tools. I have one for per network vendor. I have one for an architecture, a syslog, DNS, cloud connectivity now, or I have in the cloud separate monitoring tools. You our teams have to swivel chair across these. You have multiple teams coming in, and when there are issues, or even before issues happen, how do you proactively understand what is happening, right? And for the
Hmm.
most part, underlying monitoring has been commoditized by a lot of open source tooling. You don't need a tool just to provide collection of data, and then you are setting manual rules and regex
Hmm.
expressions to understand what is happening, right? And with the growth and complexity we talked about, it's almost impossible for an already overworked operations and engineering team that are trying to keep up with this alphabet soup of technology stacks that they are using,
Hmm.
and then having to deal with 18 to 20 different monitoring tools. And I say 18 to 20, that's what we've seen with
Wow.
our deployments, right? And it's
Hmm.
incredibly complex. And I see teams that we are working with on the operations side, they are up all the time, right? The
Hmm.
first premise is automation of how my data is being processed and how I am able to get insights from the infrastructure. That's the
Right.
premise for observability and the promise for observability. What observability allows them to do is set SLAs and
Hmm.
know when KPIs for those SLAs are being violated, or even proactively tell them that KPIs are being violated. Right?
Hmm.
The cloud
Before it
providers,
gets
like
to be an actual sort of SLA violation, you mean? So.
exactly, right.
Hmm.
You define SLAs, and the monitoring is collecting everything you need, but teams are acting on service level SLAs and KPIs, so they're not inundated by noise. Right, my CPU is at 80%, 85%, 90%. My memory is being violated, or you have one failure that cascades into multiple alarms, and suddenly I have to deal with 100 different alarms, and I should have really been even proactively notified about that, right?
Right.
Especially when you look when and now observability allows you to do that on an individual domain basis, right? I don't have to understand the underlying infrastructure. For
Mm.
each domain, yeah, I can set SLAs and KPIs, and I can understand what is happening within these domains, right? But you have multiple domains. You have applications, and I paint a broad brush saying applications. There's lots
Hmm.
of different subdomains within applications. That's my
Right.
infrastructure that the applications are residing on. It's no longer just physical servers. You have VMs and then containers and then applications. Just networking. I have LAN, Wi-Fi,
Hmm.
wide area networks. You have within networking DNS, DHCP, Cloud Connect. I might going through an Equinix or a Digital Realty. The
Right.
premise for AIOps is once I have good observability deployed, how do I interconnect these domains? If I have a performance issue that I'm proactively detecting based on an observability solution, is there an issue because of my DNS, or is there an
Hmm.
issue within my Cloud Connect, or am I having provider issues with BGP, or is my Wi-Fi down? Right,
Hmm.
that's the premise for AI ops. And and it's not just a tool. No tool can come in and say, okay, hey, here is automated AI ops. Absolutely, that won't work.
Sure.
What
Yeah.
teams need are platforms and
Hmm.
solution building support as their workflows are unique, right? Just a tool that is generic will fail.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So the signal to noise ratio of all of this could get overwhelming, right? So there's going to be alerts of some kind going on at all times. But I take it from what you're saying that, of course, the real issue in observability is being able to quickly solve the problem, right? So I think that definitely, from hearing from the IT infrastructure side at the enterprise, or really from the carriers managing this or MSPs managing this, that's the great difficulty now, is that compared to that pretty easy point to point or MPLS kind of world, hub and spoke, whatever they used to be in, that there's just so much information. You mentioned even all these multiple observability tools, let alone the multiple factors within them, that sorting this all out to become actionable information is still a real challenge, right?
Absolutely, yes. And being able to quickly and proactively know about it, right?
Hmm.
I'll give you one example. I was at an airport lounge, a couple of weeks back, and I did my board meeting from there because I'm
Mm,
finishing a customer meeting. I'm coming in
right.
there, and we were, and I could see a lot of others are doing it. Right? Networks have become
Hmm.
absolutely critical, and something happened. Performance was an issue,
Right.
and it's no longer just basically where, hey, if I have connectivity, it's good enough. To be able to quickly and proactively troubleshoot that, and imagine the complexity of the infrastructure where I'm on an airport Wi-Fi in a lounge somewhere running a board meeting, the number of things that need to come together, and I'm dependent on that infrastructure to be reliable, secure, and performant. Right?
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. So now, before we go any further, Kannan, I just want to pull back a little bit. You mentioned specifically AIOps. That term can have slightly different meanings when it's with when I'm talking to slightly different people, and we always want to bring everybody who's listening to this show, because we have a kind of broad audience from the telecom world, the end user world, different kinds of vendors or whatever. How, for your purposes at Selector, would you define AIOps?
Really good question. If you look at traditionally what we think of as AI. It's, hey, are my photos being recognized on Facebook or Google?
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Chat
that's
GPT now is what everyone wants to talk about with AI, right?
exactly
So
right.
yeah.
Actually,
Hmm.
ChatGPT is a great example of model-driven AI. I have
Hmm.
a lot of data, and it is being labeled by an army of people, on what the data coming in
Right.
means, right? So labeling is absolutely crucial for model-driven AI. So I have seen
Hmm.
all of these patterns and occurrences in the past. I'm going to have somebody label and teach the system what it is, and then I'm going to apply that model to new data coming in. Right? So
Hmm.
photos might be one example. I'm training based on all the photos that I already have, and you're saying, in your Apple or your photos, you do this, right? This is person X, this is person Y, and then it's able to recognize in different scenarios, is that same person
Right.
in this photo, right?
Which I'll
And
say,
that's
as a non-technical person, in a way, that is fairly straightforward to understand. Certainly, obviously not at the level of the algorithm, but as a concept, I think everybody can sort of grasp onto what's happening there.
exactly. And it's you predictably seen what is going to happen based on past data, and somebody has labeled it, right? So that's
Right.
model driven, and a lot of initial AI ops infrastructure use that approach, but that
Hmm.
doesn't work, right? So
Hmm.
what we do is what we call data centric AI.
Mm.
It's the
Okay.
data that we have in front of us determines the outcome that AI ops provides to you, right? Because
Hmm.
one, but why do we need that? One, historical data is never available in a clean label manner from
Right.
infrastructure. It's just not there.
And that would require people going through this old historical data and doing, just like you say, it's one thing with language or whatever, but having someone label all of these, label them accurately and in a way that can be plugged into an algorithm or whatever, that's just a lot of work that hasn't been done. Is that the case?
That's absolutely right. You take
Mhm.
the scenario where a customer running a network, running infrastructure, wants to take advantage of AI ops, and compare that to, say, ChatGPT. How
Mhm.
long, how many years has ChatGPT been trained to get to
Exactly.
a state? And even now, it gets to a state where you get a lot of erroneous answers, right?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
just is not something that people running critical infrastructure will
Yeah.
accept.
Yeah,
First,
that won't
you're
do.
not going to
Yeah.
train for 2 years, and even the training data, you don't have an army sitting offshore labeling this. So you have
Hmm.
to make use of the data coming in. So what we do, we've seen enough scenarios, we've built enough use cases and algorithms based on existing scenarios we see. But you cannot take data from one customer to the other, right? These are all completely proprietary
Hmm. Hmm.
data. So what we have is algorithms that then make use of existing data that our customers are sending to us on a real-time basis. So you all of the current data informs the outcomes and the decisions and the correlations we are making. And the other
Hmm.
crucial part of data centric is the fact that if something happened in the past, it doesn't mean that you can say, hey, that's the reason you're having an issue now. Right? So it could be that, hey, I'm having performance issue because my BGP chose an alternate path. But now you might be having performance issue because I'm seeing QoS drops, or I might seeing optical. You can't
Hmm.
say, hey, previously I saw a performance issue and that was because of BGP. I learned that every time you have a performance issue in this part of the network, I'm going to say it's because of BGP. You have to make use of real-time data, real-time correlation
Right.
to provide contextual output and contextual information. That is a huge difference between model centric and data centric AI. And I've
Hmm.
also started to hear the term process centric, which is actually quite good, where
Hmm.
it's you take the data, but then you have to align that to a particular customer's workflows or processes,
Right.
right? You just cannot spit out generic inputs or outputs to them, and that's basically where the solution aspect comes in. A tool would spit out generic outputs, but a
Hmm.
solution is contextual to the workflows that a particular customer has.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. Let's focus on that. I know there was what I found to be a really interesting blog post on your site at Selector about the observability platform versus the observability tool. Could you flesh that out for us more distinctly?
Yeah, if you build a generic tool, you it has to be it basically it'll eventually end up being a sea of menus and options
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
then the operations and the networking teams have to customize for themselves, and no tool can really replicate workflows that some of these complex enterprises have. So
Right.
we always take a solutions building approach, either ourselves or through a partner. It, the tool have to be very programmable, but the tool is just the starting point. The
Hmm.
platform takes basically the workflows that the customers have, and then provide a solution that is closely aligned with their specific needs, with their workflows. How do you tune the algorithms that the AI solution is using? And is this what your business processes are? And how do you perform workflows, remediations based on your business needs, right? A
Hmm.
tool basically will not be able to provide that. You need to have a solution building approach with your customers, and your platform has to be very programmable to be able to support that, right? That's basically the
Right.
approach that we have taken, and that's the only approach for AIOps that will work.
Hmm. Right. That essentially you have to have a foundation you're building on because of the complexity that we're dealing with here. Everyone's complexity is going to look a little bit different. So you have to not have just a sort of dumb tool, if you will, that works the same way regardless of what the enterprise or their MSP or whatever the case may be is having to manage within their network. And I mean, definitely, I see this as true across the looking at the enterprise world when I talk to folks that manage large networks. That even within, say, the same vertical or something like that, okay, well, if I'm in healthcare, we all still have compliance similar, but everyone's network ends up still being very different, even sometimes different down to their style of how they want to do things. So I think anything that is going to have this like broad ability has to be flexible enough to deal with all these different layers of complexity. Certainly.
Exactly, and it's still early days in this journey in the
Hmm.
industry. The where the data is still very heterogeneous, not
Hmm.
fully clean. Yeah,
Right.
the workflow and the platform approach starts with first the ETL layer. Right? I have data, and for AI and ML to work, I need good tagging. I need good labeling, but CMDBs are not perfect, and you
Hmm.
need to use labels and tags available in the data itself. Now, how do they relate to each other? That could be different for different customers. One of our customers has a definition called hybrid cloud. There is no such thing as hybrid cloud in a
Hmm.
real network. So you have to work with them to have the definition of what is your hybrid cloud. All right.
Hmm.
Is it one of the service providers, and is it cloud connections at Equinix, or or Digital Realty, or are you using third party networks? Do you have your own campus network? What does that mean?
Right.
How is this data labeled in your infrastructure? And then how do you connect the dots, right? What defines an SLA violation for you? What
Hmm.
defines the connecting dots in terms of your infrastructure? What are the current tooling you have? Very little is greenfield.
Hmm.
Most of
Hmm.
them, I would say all of them are brownfield. They already have existing tooling in place. We cannot go to them and say, hey, you need to replace your existing tooling to take advantage of our AI ops. You have to align two things, and these are tools that have been used for a while. And the human element has come in. How do they enter data? How do they
Hmm.
interact with it? All of that has to be taken into account. This is a solution building exercise that it will lead to success, right? And then as you learn, you start to automate more and more of these workflows, more and more of these solutions, right? But it's still very early days on this.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of what you say reminds me a lot of the conversations I've had around SASE lately. It's very much that there's a sense out there in which, okay, the CTO CIO has heard about SASE, and infrastructure team, security team get together, check this box for us. But in the end, that's like a framework that you're never going to be greenfield on. You already have a dozen security providers, and then it's like, how do I keep what I have going without, no one can afford to do rip and replace of everything. So I hear you saying kind of the same story with monitoring, that it's like you would approach it as, okay, what's there? What are you doing? What are you looking for now? And we'll work with that, rather than just saying sort of like, let's start from scratch, because no one can practically do that in the real world, I think.
That's exactly right. And the strength of the platform is in how quickly can you then take those inputs, how flexible is your programming model, right? How
Mm-hmm.
quickly can you process the ETL layer that might be different by customer, and how much of the expertise you have learned, not the data. The data, as I mentioned before, I'll reiterate, is proprietary, but you have learned things on your own from working with different types of environments. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of data out there from various vendors and infrastructure. How quickly can you bring those in into new deployments so that customers can see value quickly, right? Just because it's a
Mm-hmm.
solution building exercise, it cannot be 6 months or nine
Right.
months of solution building. How quickly can you do that? But this is the turnkey aspect, is how flexible and programmable these platforms can be, so that
Mm-hmm.
the end users are seeing outcomes rather than struggling with programming or struggling with configuring the tools.
Right, right, absolutely. And like we said before, kind of in the end, observability is all about what actions can I take that will, keep me from going down or keep me from losing data from some customers or whatever the case may be, right? That getting to action is the real point, right?
Yes, exactly.
So now in that light, I wonder if we could kind of go over your market strategy, right? So we haven't really addressed this yet. Is this a tool for providers, MSPs? Is this a tool for the enterprise directly? Is it some mix of that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So where we see the most traction as well as importance placed to a solution like this is, if is your infrastructure critical to your revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be it networks, be it compute infrastructure. What is the impact of not just your network or infrastructure going down, but even having a performance issue, right?
Right.
So clearly, if the network is your business, that tends to be an area where we resonate very well. All right, hey,
Right.
I not just I need my network up and running. It has to be highly performant, available, and secure. And I'm adding a lot of services on top of this. So
Mm-hmm.
service providers, telcos, hosting providers, cloud providers, these are natural fit for the solution. But
Mm-hmm.
like what I mentioned before, networks are becoming critical for everybody, right? So
Yeah.
if you're in hospitality and your network goes down, is that going to have a revenue impact?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. If I'm a retailer and my network is not performant, I'm going to see a network issue. I'm sorry, I'm going to see a revenue issue.
Right.
Those are customers that naturally are a great fit for us, and that's basically where we've seen the most success, right? So, do you
Mm-hmm.
value your infrastructure, networks, and applications from a revenue point of view, not just, hey, I need to have this, right, because I need to provide connectivity, right?
Right.
That tends to be where we have most success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, that is the way the enterprise win is going across many different verticals and lines of business. Right? Is that the whole point of digital transformation in a way is to allow the network to enable business rather than just have the network there as something that has to be in place as infrastructure so that business can happen. It's now integrated into how business happens for so many companies. I think just going to be more so the case. And again, we're in that world where, while that is more so the case, and the C-level people want to see those kinds of results, then there's more pressure on IT infrastructure to make sure that that's all working, right? So
Yes.
it's all of a sudden a much more skill demanded and high pressure job perhaps than it ever has been. Excellent. So, can you share with us any sort of specific use cases along the lines of, probably not naming names, but maybe a kind of business engagement and what specific problems they were looking to solve?
Absolutely. So our current deployments, we have several use cases, and I would say target environments that we've really been successful in our deployments. Data center networking, application delivery tends to be a pretty wide use case for us. You
Hmm.
have customers that run their own data centers. Lots of them still do, and they're also moving to the cloud. Now, how do I provide obs- observability and AIOps across this hybrid environment, right? So
Right.
that tends to be a very large segment of our use cases. And then how am I connecting them, right? SD-WAN clearly is a pretty big use case for us today.
Hmm.
And WAN connectivity is super crucial now. Like to go back to our previous conversation, first thing most business users, as soon as they get into a plane, the first thing they're doing is connecting to Wi-Fi and paying for it, paying a
Hmm.
premium for it. And if that WAN connectivity has performance issues, that's going to be a big problem for the airline, right?
Right.
You're going to either ask for your money back, or you're not going to do it again, right? Or you're going to pick a different
Hmm.
airline. Same thing goes for hospitality, or if anywhere I am, work is being done in multiple places, and applications need to be delivered reliably. So WAN connectivity is a huge area of focus, not just within the data center, but data center to data center, data center to cloud, right? That hybrid cloud aspect. Some using SD-WAN, some using cloud connect providers like Equinix or Digital
Hmm.
Realty or the like, or enterprises running their own wide area networks or using the
Right.
public internet as well, right? So that
Hmm.
dominates our use cases today. We are we are also starting to see a lot of interest in container networking, especially
Hmm.
around as enterprises move to the cloud. They are going to require the type of interconnectivity that they had within the data center, right? VPN within their applications, right? Security and segmentation. So container network is evolving, but with it comes the need to observe, to automate that. And we are also seeing a lot of interest in private 5G, 5G overall,
Mm-hmm.
private 5G for enterprises, 5G for an application delivery at the edge using solutions like Mac mobile edge compute, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for enterprises, SASE. We are hearing a lot of requests for SASE based visibility. Very early still, but that's
Mm-hmm.
something clearly an area of focus for us this year.
And so, could you perhaps fit into someone's, say, zero trust solution, where one of the promises of the SASE zero trust kind of framework is that you can know who everyone is and whether they're doing something unusual, that logging on from a device in a different location, or does that fit into sort of where Selector may go with observability?
So we don't go too deep in the security
Leave the real
anomaly
the
detection.
right, leave the security focused stuff, and stick
Yes,
with feeding information to those security tools, if that makes
yes, we
sense.
could, we
Hmm.
do connect into tools that we are not domain experts in, right? So we could
Hmm.
get
Hmm.
alerts. So that's where the AIOps comes in. We don't have to be domain experts in everything. We are domain experts in
Hmm.
networking, right? So we can
Right.
go deep in, okay, hey, a particular DWDM is having optical issues, right? We
Right.
can go as deep or debug BGP issues, but we leave the other domain areas to the respective
Hmm.
owners there. But then what we play is how do you bring it all together, right? Is the
Right.
network to blame? If it is not, then what is the team or what is the infrastructure that needs to take a look, right? It's the
Hmm.
mean time to innocence for networking. But if it is a networking issue, go deep. But if it
Hmm.
is not, who else should look at it, right? So if it is security issues, there are a lot of tools there. The Aura environment has become so diverse and complex. No one solution can go deep in everything,
Right.
right? But you need one solution that brings in where the potential issue could be, and we play that role from an AI ops point of view.
Yeah, that I think that's really clear. Thank you for that. It's like precisely what I was getting at, in the sense that there's, with this, from where we started at the beginning of the new complexity in the way, and there's also a complexity of tools, right? That there isn't a single security solution out there that someone could use. There isn't, within SD-WAN, for example, coming from Juniper, you'll have some appreciation of this, that all the SD-WAN providers have a bunch of other tools integrated into their SD-WAN
Oh
service
yes.
now, of course, right? So I think it's really interesting to understand each pieces of that, and as a network manager or as an MSP or whatever, be able to put together the right suite of best in class. And I wonder if, from your end, does that mean anything about how you guys design the tool to be able to maybe sort of sync up via API or something with other tools that have in place? Is that something that you guys are interested in?
Oh, absolutely. I think
Hmm.
the API based integration, and it's not just with other tools.
Hmm.
Like our customers, they have written a lot of homegrown applications themselves, which
Absolutely. Yeah.
requires API based, or it could be
Hmm.
spreadsheets. It could be proprietary data formats, right? Our approach is whatever engineering and operations teams at these enterprises, service providers are using to run their operations, our tool needs to connect to that,
Right.
right?
Right.
API, I would say it's standard ways to get data. Maybe it's 50% of the type of data that we get. The remaining 50% is API driven, be it
Hmm.
custom or standard, right? That is absolutely crucial, and it's also a way for us to work with partners. As I mentioned, the number of expertise, number of domains, and the expertise required there is quite large, right?
Hmm.
So one enterprise or vendor cannot solve all of these, right? And
Right.
partners, because they've been working with our end customers for a very long time, that depth of domain expertise that they bring in is absolutely crucial. And they might have some tooling on their own that we need to integrate with, right? So that
Mhm.
being open and agnostic to where the data is coming from, where the data is going to, how do you
Mhm.
automate this, right? How do you close the loop from a remediation point of view? Being open to the type of tooling that is already present for automation. These are absolutely crucial for a successful solution. It's not just that aha moment, like, hey, I'm finding the needle in the haystack. That
Right.
tends to be not the primary focus.
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense. With this complexity, the walled gardens aren't going to succeed,
No,
right? So,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Now, Conan, this has been great. I really appreciate understanding better, how observability works and impacts everything. I wonder if I could pull back with you a little bit and just say, even beyond what you're doing at Selector, what do you see coming for the WAN in the next few years? I love asking this question because everybody comes at it in a different way. But
yeah.
we've seen a lot of change over the past 5 years or so. Is that change going to keep going over the next 5 years? Do we constantly need to sort of rethink how we're enabling business over the network?
Absolutely. It's changing because the world and how people interact is changing all the time. I mean, who
Hmm.
knew the pandemic would
Right.
change things so dramatically, where my home network is absolutely crucial. And as I mentioned, an airport lounge network is absolutely crucial and
Hmm.
performant, right? And the move to edge and cloud connectivity, right? And cloud is very amorphous, right? It's not just, hey, I'm going to a cloud in a particular availability zone, right? Cloud is everywhere, right? So
Hmm.
that is continuing to change, and programmability, reliability, and security across this infrastructure is still very early on, right? Nobody has
Yeah.
really cracked the nut in terms of, hey, here is a solution that solves all of it well, and it's not going to be from one vendor architecture that is going to solve this, right? And
Hmm.
and I we are just in the beginning of the next generation of intelligent networking. You see the number
Right.
of startups in this area that are making available very very flexible and sophisticated networking solutions as enterprises evolve to users and applications are everywhere and need access reliably with high performance at any time, right?
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
not an easy thing to solve. And of course, at the underpinning all of this is cost, right?
Yeah.
I just
Yep.
cannot keep doing things the same way, right? And build such large scale infrastructure and keep down costs, right? And keep
Hmm.
down both equipment and tooling costs, but also the people costs, right? So
Yep.
that and people are also overwhelmed by the level of complexity, right? So they are looking for new solutions, constantly.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost a kind of story of the industrial and economic development of humanity here, right? Which is that we think of the world now as so complex and complicated, but all along the way we have invented these tools to help us adapt to that new environment all the time. And people hear a lot about what AI can do in the consumer world and whatnot, but I think it's really interesting to hear how that's going to develop in networking space, right? And there's been that promise of software definition, but really, do you think we're close to having something like a really functional AI ML that is easy to deploy and for folks to use without maybe a lot of upskilling on their end, or is there still going to be this like sort of transitionary period where you really need to have folks who very much understand this down to the level of the code and all that sort of thing, before it can be truly sort of plug and play, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
we definitely are in, I would say, the early phases of the promise of AI ops, right? So there's been
Hmm.
a lot of promise, right? A lot of disillusionment. Yeah, and again, it's not because folks haven't tried, right? So some of the
Hmm.
early
Hmm.
adopters of these technologies, right? It's either the data is not ready or the technology is not ready, or the approach, was something that needed to be reconsidered for this new domain, right? You can't take,
Hmm.
AI for photo recognition and apply that to networking, right? So,
Right.
so we are still in that, early phases, right? But we've seen good results, right?
Hmm.
Folks should not expect basically, a minority report like AI, right? AI is
Right.
not God, right?
Yeah.
It's seeing
Yeah.
everything, right? There is some of that expectations. No, you have to build into a robust solution and outcome, and that takes partnership and solution building, right? It's
Hmm.
not that here is a turnkey tool. We'll get there,
Right.
right? I think it's not too far away, but
Hmm.
we have to, everybody needs to have, realization that, it's a journey rather than, okay, we already have the tools that will, deliver everything they want for us.
Yeah, one that I often like to use as an analogy is self-driving cars, because everyone can grok that easily, right? And that
Yes.
in the mind of the consumer, there was like, okay, so one day I'm going to wake up and there's going to be a car that I get in, it's going to drive me to my destination. But in reality, there's years of just taking little tiny things away from the driver's responsibility and just adding a little bit more on to the AI, and then that information going back and building and refining, the rules and the policies and that sort of thing. Is it similar in AI ops for networking?
Absolutely. That's a great example. Yes,
Hmm.
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, this has been really fun. I love this topic because there's going to be so much, I think, change over the next decade that makes being an analyst really interesting. So thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome.
And how can listeners keep up with you and what you're doing at Selector if they want to look in on you?
Absolutely. So, one, education and, posting what we learn is ourselves is super crucial for us. So we
Mm-hmm.
post a lot of this content, what we are learning, customer, not just testimonials, but the customer journey, right? As much as they're willing to share, we post that on our LinkedIn page,
Hmm.
and all of it is also available on our website, selector.ai. And given the journey, that education and, that constant interaction with the general user base is absolutely crucial for us, and
Right.
we absolutely welcome the opportunity to do more discussions such as this. Greg, really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me, and I definitely let's check in a couple years and see how things have developed. Right. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.